Chapter 1. The wandering warrior. The sun was setting over the dusty road, casting a warm orange glow over the parched landscape. Kaito, a weary samurai, walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. His thirst had become almost unbearable, and he hoped to find a village or an oasis that could quench his dry mouth. As he crested a small hill, the silhouette of a village came into view. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and the sounds of daily life carried on the breeze children's laughter, clanging pots, and the occasional bark of a dog. Kaito's pace quickened as hope rose in his chest. As he entered the village, the air grew thick with an undercurrent of fear. The villagers' eyes darted nervously about, their faces pale and pinched. Kaito sensed something was amiss, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. He made his way to the central square, where a group of guards in the lord's livery stood watch. Their armor was polished, their swords at the ready. The villagers cowered around them, eyes fixed on the ground. Kaito's gaze met that of one young villager, who shook his head ever so slightly. The warrior approached the well, expecting to find a cool, clear drink. Instead, he found two guards taunting a young man, their laughter echoing off the surrounding buildings. The villager cowered before them, tears streaming down his face as they mocked and spat at him. Kaito's instincts screamed warning, but his duty as a warrior would not permit him to stand idly by. He drew his sword, its worn leather grip feeling like an extension of his arm. "Leave him be," Kaito commanded, his voice firm but measured. The guards turned to face him, their eyes narrowing. "Mind your own business, samurai," one sneered. "This doesn't concern you." Kaito's gaze never wavered. "I'll not stand by while the innocent are tormented. You will leave this man be, or I will show you no quarter." The villagers watched in rapt attention as the guards snickered and drew their own swords. The young villager, emboldened by Kaito's presence, slowly rose to his feet. For a moment the air hung heavy with tension, as if the very fate of the village hung in balance. Then, without warning, the guards charged. Kaito met them blade to blade, his movements swift and precise. The villagers watched in awe as the warrior's sword sliced through the chaos, sending the guards fleeing in disarray. As the dust settled, Kaito turned to face the young villager, who stood tall now, a look of gratitude burning in his eyes. The warrior sheathed his blade, his chest heaving with exertion. "Thank you," the villager whispered, his voice trembling. Kaito nodded once, twice, and then disappeared into the fading light, leaving behind a village that would never forget the day the wandering samurai brought them freedom from their oppressors. Chapter 2. The villages awakening the sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a warm orange glow. The air was alive with the sounds of celebration and murmurs of whispers. Villagers milled about, their faces aglow with hope and excitement. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, they felt a sense of freedom. In the town square, Kaito's actions had sparked a chain reaction of defiance. The young villager he had saved, a quiet man named Hiro, now stood at the forefront of a growing rebellion. His eyes blazed with determination as he rallied his fellow villagers, sharing stories of past injustices and encouraging them to take back control of their lives. As the night wore on, the village square transformed into a hub of activity. Villagers from all walks of life converged, sharing tales of oppression and resistance. The air was filled with the sweet scent of burning incense, wafting from makeshift altars constructed in honor of Kaito's bravery. The Lord's guards, once feared and respected, now slunk away, their tails between their legs. They whispered among themselves, wondering how this could have happened under their very noses. Their lord, the tyrant who had ruled with an iron fist, was nowhere to be found a sign that his grip on power was weakening. As the villagers' enthusiasm grew, so did their resolve. They began to organize, dividing into small groups to gather supplies and information. Some ventured out to gather allies from neighboring villages, while others worked tirelessly to create makeshift defenses. The very fabric of their community was being rewoven, thread by thread. In a small cottage on the outskirts of town, Kaido sat cross-legged on a mat, his eyes closed as he focused on the rhythmic chant of the villagers' prayers. His sword lay nearby, its worn leather grip a reminder of the events that had transpired. Though tired and battered, the warrior's spirit remained unbroken. As the night wore on, the chanting grew louder, the villagers' voices intertwining like the threads of a tapestry. The air vibrated with an energy that seemed to seep into Kaito's very being. He felt it the spark of resistance that had ignited within him, now spreading throughout the village. The warrior's eyes snapped open, his gaze meeting that of Hiro, who stood outside the door, a look of purpose burning in his eyes. "Kaito-san," Hiro whispered, "the villagers are ready to march against our oppressors. Will you join us?" Kaito's chest swelled with pride as he nodded, the blade of his sword glinting in the flickering candlelight. Together they would face the darkness that had long plagued this land, a challenge that would require all their strength, courage, and conviction. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Kaito stood tall, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The villagers, emboldened by his presence, marched alongside him, their hearts beating as one. The war drums began to beat, signaling the start of a long and bloody struggle for freedom. Chapter 3: The Lords. Wrath. The village square was abuzz with activity as Kaito and the villagers prepared for their bold move against the Lord's tyranny. Hiro, ever the strategist, worked tirelessly to organize the resistance into manageable units, while Kaito took his place at the forefront of the gathering. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, a sense of anticipation hung heavy over the crowd. The villagers' faces were set with determination, their eyes locked on the warrior who had sparked this revolution. Kaito's gaze swept the sea of determined faces, his heart swelling with pride and purpose. Suddenly the sound of clanging steel echoed through the air as Lord Raide's guards emerged from the castle gates. The Lord himself rode at the forefront, a scowl etched on his face. His eyes locked onto Kaito, a cold calculation burning within them. "You dare defy me?" Raige sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "I am your lord and master. You will pay for your insolence." Kaito stood tall, his sword at the ready. "We mean no disrespect, lord, but we can no longer live under your tyranny. The villagers are tired of being oppressed, tired of living in fear." Raide's face turned a deep shade of crimson as he dismounted his horse. His guards closed in around him, their blades glinting menacingly. "You will pay for your defiance," Raige spat, drawing his own sword. "You are nothing but rebels, and I will crush you like the insignificant insects you are." Kaito's eyes never left the lord's face as he drew a deep breath. He knew that this was at the moment of truth. With a swift motion he charged forward, his sword flashing in the sunlight. The battle raged on, the sounds of clashing steel and screams filling the air. The villagers fought valiantly, their numbers slowly pushing back against the Lord's guards. Kaito wielded his blade with precision, taking down opponent after opponent. As the fight wore on, Raige himself became more and more agitated. His eyes blazed with fury as he struck out at anyone who dared to oppose him. But for every blow he landed, Kaito seemed to counter with one of his own, slowly but surely pushing the lord back. The villagers began to take heart, their cries of "Huzzah!" and for freedom ringing out across the square. The tide of the battle was turning, and with it the fate of the province. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, Kaito and Raide faced off against each other. Their blades clashed in a flurry of steel and sparks, their eyes locked in a fierce stare down. In that moment All seemed lost, the outcome of the battle, the fate of the villagers, and the future of the province hanging precariously in balance. But Kato's determination and conviction remained unwavering, his spirit burning brighter than ever before. The warrior knew that this was not just a fight for freedom, but a chance to rewrite the very fabric of their community, to weave a new tapestry of hope and courage. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Kaito's sword flashed one final time, striking true and sending Raidi crashing to the ground. The villagers erupted into cheers as Kaito stood victorious, his blade raised high in triumph. The war drums beat on, signaling the start of a new era, an era of freedom, hope, and limitless possibility. Chapter for the birth of a revolution, the night air was alive with the sound of cheers and chanting as Kaito stood tall, his sword still trembling from the final blow. The villagers, now emboldened by their newfound freedom, swarmed around him, congratulating and thanking him for their liberation. Amidst the celebration, Kaito's gaze swept the square, taking in the devastation wrought by Raige's tyranny. Buildings lay in ruins, and the once thriving market was now a mere shadow of its former self. As the villagers continued to rejoice, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the elderly villager who had been mercilessly beaten by Raige's guards just hours before. His eyes, though still puffy and red, shone with gratitude as he approached Kaito. "Thank you," the old man whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you for giving us back our freedom." Kaito's expression softened, and he nodded solemnly. "You are welcome, my friend. But this is not just about me or Raige. This is about a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and create something better than what was lost." The old man's eyes sparkled with understanding as he looked around at the jubilant crowd. "I think you may be the one who can lead us, Kaito. You have shown us that even in the darkest of times there is always hope, and I believe that with your guidance we can forge a brighter future for ourselves and our children." Kaito's face flushed with humility as he shook his head. "I am but one man, my friend. But if the people want to stand with me, then together we can achieve great things." The old man nodded vigorously, and soon a chorus of agreements echoed through the square. The villagers began to gather around Kaito, their faces set with determination and hope. As the night wore on, the whispers turned into murmurs, and the murmurs grew into shouts. "Kaito! Kaito!" The warrior's name became a battle cry as the people of the province rallied behind him. They knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but with Kaito at their side, they felt an unshakable sense of purpose. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the scene. Amidst the chaos, a small group of villagers approached Kaito, bearing a makeshift banner emblazoned with the symbol of the rising sun. The warrior's eyes locked onto the image, and he felt a surge of pride and responsibility. The villagers began to chant once more, their voices weaving together in a rich tapestry of sound. "Kaito! Kaito!" This time it was not just a battle cry, it was a declaration of unity and purpose. The warrior's name had become synonymous with hope, and he knew that the people would follow him anywhere. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Kaito stood tall, his sword still clutched in his hand. He looked out upon the sea of faces, his heart swelling with emotion. This was not just a victory, it was the beginning of something new. A new era born from the ashes of oppression and tyranny. The villagers, now fully awakened to their newfound freedom, began to disperse, returning to their homes and communities. But Kaito remained, lost in thought as he gazed out upon the ruins of the province. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but he also knew that he was not alone. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and as its rays danced across Kaito's face, he smiled, his eyes burning with determination. The warrior knew that this was just the beginning, the start of a long and arduous journey to rebuild, to create, and to forge a brighter future for himself and those around him. Chapter 5: The Path Ahead. As the sun continued its ascent into the sky, Kaito's thoughts turned from the immediate aftermath of their victory to the daunting task that lay before them. The province was in shambles, and the people were left to pick up the pieces of a life ravaged by tyranny. The warrior knew that rebuilding would be no easy feat, but he also knew that it was essential. With his sword still clutched in his hand, Kaito walked through the village, taking in the destruction and despair that surrounded him. Buildings lay in ruins, their walls cracked and broken, and the streets were strewn with debris. The once thriving marketplace was now a mere shadow of its former self, with only a few stalls still standing. As he walked, Kaito encountered villagers going about their daily routines, some weeping openly while others simply stared blankly into space. He saw families huddled together, trying to make sense of the devastation that had been wrought upon them. And yet, amidst all this chaos and despair, there was a glimmer of hope. The villagers, though battered and bruised, were beginning to find their footing again. They were starting to rebuild, to repair and to restore what had been lost. Kaito saw it in the way they looked at each other with a new-found sense of trust and camaraderie. He saw it in the way they worked together, side by side, to clear the rubble and mend the broken. As he walked, Kaito's thoughts turned to the future. He knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But he also knew that he was not alone. The villagers, though battered and bruised, were beginning to find their strength again. They were starting to stand tall, to look up at the sky, and to imagine a brighter future. And as Kaito walked, the image of the rising sun emblazoned on the makeshift banner began to take shape in his mind. He saw it as a symbol of hope, of renewal, and of rebirth. The warrior knew that he had been given a great responsibility to lead these people forward, to guide them through the darkness, and to bring them into the light. As the sun continued its ascent into the sky, Kaito's determination grew. He knew that he would face many challenges ahead, but he was ready. The warrior was no longer just a wandering samurai, seeking nothing more than a cup of water. He was now a leader, a symbol of hope, and a beacon of light in a world that had been plunged into darkness. And as the villagers began to stir once more, Kaito stood tall, his sword still clutched in his hand. He looked out upon the sea of faces, his eyes burning with determination. This was not just the beginning, it was the start of something new. A new era, born from the ashes of oppression and tyranny. The villagers, now fully awakened to their new-found freedom, began to disperse once more, returning to their homes and communities. But Kaito remained, lost in thought as he gazed out upon the ruins of the province. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but he also knew that he was not alone. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and as its rays danced across Kaito's face, he smiled, his eyes burning with determination. The warrior knew that this was just the beginning, the start of a long and arduous journey to rebuild, to create, and to forge a brighter future for himself and those around him. As the villagers disappeared into the distance, Kaito stood tall, his sword still clutched in his hand. He looked out upon the sea of faces, his eyes burning with determination. And as the sun continued its ascent into the sky, the warrior knew that he had a long and difficult road ahead, but he was ready to face it head on. Chapter 6: The Road Ahead. As the sun reached its zenith, Kaito's gaze drifted from the distant villagers to the scorched earth before him. The once thriving province lay in ruins, a testament to the brutal rule of the tyrant who had held it hostage for so long. The warrior's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the damage, his mind already racing with the task ahead. Rebuilding would be no easy feat. Resources were scarce, and the people themselves had been drained of their spirit. Kaito knew that mere words of encouragement would not suffice. Tangible action was needed to spark the flame of hope within them once more. With a deep breath he sheathed his sword and set off towards the province's central hub, the lord's castle, now reduced to smouldering rubble. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and ash as Kaito navigated through the debris-strewn streets. As he approached the castle's remains, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Akane, the young woman who had first alerted him to the lord's atrocities. Her eyes still bore the scars of her past, but a newfound determination burned within them. "Kaito-san," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been waiting for you. The people are scared, Kaito-san. They don't know what the future holds." The warrior's expression softened. He knew that the villagers' fear was justified, but he also knew that they needed someone to guide them through this dark time. "He'll help them, Akane," he promised, his voice firm. "Together, we'll rebuild and create a new future, one where people are free to live their lives without fear of tyranny." Akane's eyes lit up with hope as she nodded. Together they surveyed the castle's ruins, discussing strategies for the days ahead. The first order of business was to establish a provisional government, one that would ensure the people's safety and provide basic necessities like food and shelter. Kaito knew that this would not be an easy task, but he was determined to see it through. As night began to fall, casting a dark shadow over the ravaged landscape, Kaito and Akane set out to rally the villagers. They traveled from hamlet to hamlet, sharing stories of courage and resilience and inspiring others to join their cause. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but with every step Kaito felt a sense of purpose growing within him. He was no longer just a wandering samurai seeking a cup of water. He was now a leader, guiding his people towards a brighter future. As the stars twinkled to life in the night sky, Kaito stood tall, his eyes burning with determination. The province's fate hung in the balance, but he knew that as long as there were people willing to stand together and fight for their freedom, anything was possible. Chapter 7: The Road Ahead. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Kaito and Akane set out to survey the province's damage. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the sweet scent of blooming cherry blossoms as they made their way through the ravaged landscape. The once green fields now lay barren and charred, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the Lord's armies. As they rode, Kaito couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility wash over him. He had always been a wanderer, content to drift from place to place, seeking only to quench his thirst and find solace in the simplicity of life. But now, with Akane by his side and the fate of the province hanging in the balance, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. Their first stop was the town of Katsuragi, a bustling hub of commerce and industry that had been ravaged by the Lord's armies. The streets were empty, the buildings charred and blackened, but as they rode through the silent streets, Kaito spotted glimmers of hope. A group of villagers huddled together in an alleyway, whispering among themselves, their eyes locked on Kaito with a mixture of fear and determination. Akane nudged his horse forward, her eyes scanning the rooftops for any signs of enemy soldiers. "We should be careful," she whispered. "The Lord's men won't hesitate to attack anyone who shows support for the rebellion." Kaito nodded grimly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, but he also knew that they couldn't let fear dictate their actions. As they dismounted their horses and approached the villagers, Kaito spotted a young girl cowering in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. He knelt beside her, his hand gently stroking her hair as he spoke softly to reassure her. Akane watched with a mixture of concern and admiration, knowing that this was a moment of great vulnerability for her warrior. The villagers slowly began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty. Kaito and Akane shared stories of hope and resilience, inspiring the villagers to join their cause and fight for their freedom. As they left Katsuragi behind, the sun dipping low in the horizon, Kaito felt a sense of determination growing within him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but with every step he felt himself becoming more confident, more certain that they could rebuild and create a new future. The wind began to pick up as they rode into the night, the stars twinkling like diamonds in the sky above. Kaito's eyes burned with determination, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew that the fate of the province hung in the balance, but he also knew that as long as there were people willing to stand together and fight for their freedom, anything was possible. With Akane by his side, Kaito rode into the darkness, ready to face whatever lay ahead, driven by a newfound sense of purpose and conviction. Chapter 8. The days passed like grains of sand in an hourglass, each one blending seamlessly into the next as Kaito and Akane led their rebellion against the tyrant's rule. They traversed mountains and valleys, braved treacherous rivers, and fought off bandits and mercenaries hired by Lord Yamato to quash the uprising. As they journeyed on, Kaito's legend grew among the villagers, who whispered stories of his bravery in hushed tones around campfires. His name became synonymous with hope and freedom, a beacon of light in the darkening skies of Katsuragi province. One morning, as the sun rose over a dusty plain, Kaito gazed out at the sea of faces gathered before him. The villagers, now armed and organized, stood united behind their leader, their eyes burning with determination to overthrow Lord Yamato's oppressive regime. "We are not just fighting for our freedom," Kaito declared, his voice carrying across the landscape. "We are fighting for the right to live as we choose, to farm our land, to trade without fear of reprisal, and to worship as we see fit." The villagers erupted into cheers, their cries echoing across the plain as Akane stood by Kaito's side, her hand on the hilt of her sword. Together they surveyed the landscape, plotting their next move in the war against Lord Yamato. As they prepared to march toward the provincial capital, a young warrior named Taro approached Kaito, his eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. "Sensei," he said, bowing low, "I've come to ask for your permission to lead a group of our most skilled fighters in a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines." Kaito's expression turned thoughtful as he considered Taro's request. He knew that the young warrior was eager to prove himself on the battlefield, but he also recognized the risks involved in sending a small force deep into enemy territory. "What is your plan, Taro?" Kaito asked, his voice measured. Taro's eyes lit up with enthusiasm as he outlined his strategy, his words spilling forth like a river. Kaito listened intently, asking probing questions and making mental notes as the young warrior spoke. When Taro finished, Kaito nodded thoughtfully. "I approve your plan, Taro. But remember, caution is key. We cannot afford to lose any more good men in unnecessary battles." Taro bowed deeply, his face aglow with gratitude. "Thank you, Sensei," he said, his voice filled with reverence. As the sun began its descent into the horizon, Kaito and Akane led their forces toward the provincial capital, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The wind whispered secrets in their ears, promising a dawn of liberation, and the stars twinkled above like diamonds, illuminating the path to freedom. Chapter 9. The warrior's path. The village of Akakawa lay shrouded in silence, its inhabitants cowering in fear behind closed doors and shuttered windows. Lord Yamato's guards patrolled the streets, their cruel laughter echoing through the stillness. It had been months since Kaito and his rebels had launched a daring raid on the provincial capital, and though they had tasted victory, the war was far from won. In the midst of this somber scene, a lone figure emerged from the trees, his sandals crunching against the dry earth. A wandering samurai, his armor worn and weathered, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. He moved with purpose, his gaze fixed on some distant point as if drawn by an unseen force. As he entered the village, the guards' faces turned toward him, their hands instinctively reaching for the hilts of their swords. The samurai paid them no mind, his focus fixed on the well at the center of the village square. He approached it with a quiet reverence, as if seeking solace in its cool, clear waters. But fate had other plans. As he bent to take a drink, a commotion erupted at the edge of the square. One of Lord Yamato's guards, his face twisted with cruelty, began to torment a humble villager. The samurai's eyes narrowed as he watched the scene unfold, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. Without hesitation, he strode toward the pair, his movements swift and deliberate. The guard, sensing danger, turned to face him, but the samurai was undaunted. With a few swift strikes, he dispatched the man, freeing the villager from his grasp. The villagers, initially frozen in fear, now watched with a mix of awe and gratitude as the samurai stood tall, his sword still trembling with rage. For a moment the air hung heavy with tension, until the samurai's gaze swept across the crowd, his eyes burning with an unspoken warning, "Do not forget this moment." In that instant something shifted within the villagers. Their fear gave way to defiance, their hearts afire with a desire for freedom and justice. The warrior's blade had sparked a fire that would soon spread throughout the province, igniting a rebellion that would shake the very foundations of Lord Yamato's rule. As the samurai turned to leave, his eyes met those of Taro, who stood at the edge of the crowd, his face aglow with admiration. For a moment their gazes locked, and in that fleeting instant the threads of fate were woven together. The warrior vanished into the trees, leaving behind a village transformed. The villagers, emboldened by his actions, began to whisper secrets among themselves, their voices carrying on the wind like sparks from a burning fire. And as the stars twinkled above, illuminating the path to freedom, Kaito's rebels prepared to march once more into the fray, their hearts afire with the promise of liberation. The wind whispered secrets in their ears, promising a dawn of deliverance, and the very earth itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. The warriors' path had crossed theirs, igniting a chain reaction that would soon shake the foundations of Lord Yamato's rule. And though the darkness still loomed large, the light of freedom was slowly beginning to illuminate the horizon, casting its rays across the land like a beacon calling out to those who would dare to follow.